Lincoln, Nebraska, 1991. An Anglican priest named Ray Bowish sits in a hotel room across from two men he has never met. They identify themselves as physicists, Department of Defense. They look like they haven't slept in days. Then one of them slides a photograph across the table. It shows a body, wired, hosed, and according to these men, that person died during a government-run ritual designed to contact non-human entities. "We made a pact with the devil," one of them says, "and people died. To understand how it ever came to that, you have to go back 45 years. The Mojave Desert, January 1946. A man stands alone under a sky that feels electrically wrong, charged like the air before a lightning strike that never comes. His name is Jack Parsons. By day, one of the most brilliant rocket engineers in the United States. Tonight, he is performing Enochian sex magic, reciting invocations into the dark, while his partner scans the horizon for a response. According to their own written accounts, something answered. In July 1952, dozens of glowing objects appeared over Washington, D.C., circling the U.S. Capitol dome in a display that was simultaneously tracked on radar and witnessed by pilots. The sightings dominated the front pages of every major newspaper in the country, yet when the Air Force scrambled jets, they found nothing. While the official explanation satisfied almost no one, a secret government faction began asking a question no official body would touch. What if the answer wasn't extraterrestrial, and wasn't something they could say out loud? Jack Parsons was a JPL co-founder, a Caltech prodigy, the engineer whose fuel formulas made American rocketry possible. He was also a practicing occultist who believed magic and physics were the same discipline. The Pentagon and the desert, the lab coat and the ritual robes, both were completely, sincerely him. That combination is what makes the next part of this story possible. Aleister Crowley was born in 1875 into a wealthy English family of strict Plymouth Brethren fundamentalists. He rejected every inch of it. When his mother called him the Beast 666 as a reprimand, he adopted it as a title. By the time he reached adulthood, he had made a deliberate, systematic project of becoming everything the respectable world feared: occultist, provocateur, and by his own enthusiastic account, the most wicked man alive. The global press eventually obliged him with the headline, "A Man We'd Like to Hang." In 1918, Aleister Crowley conducted what he called the Babalon Working, an extended ritual series intended to contact an entity from beyond the physical plane. He believed he succeeded. He called the entity Lamb. Then he drew a portrait of it. His portrait of Lamb depicts a figure with a bald head, enormous dark eyes, an elongated face, and a tiny vestigial mouth. Feature for feature, it is the gray alien, an image that would saturate pop culture and abduction reports decades after Crowley put ink to paper. While that could be a mere coincidence, it also serves as the first data point in an argument that a classified US intelligence faction would later treat as foundational. The system Crowley was working with in 1918 had a specific name and a specific pedigree. Enochian magic was developed in the 16th century by John Dee, mathematician, cartographer, and advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, working alongside a scryer named Edward Kelly. Over a series of sessions beginning in 1582, Kelly claimed to receive transmissions from angelic entities, a complete language, its own alphabet, its own grammar, and a hierarchy of spiritual beings arranged across what the angels called the 30 Aethers. Dee recorded everything meticulously. He believed he was receiving revelation. The roots of the 1918 working go back 14 years earlier to Cairo, 1904. Crowley and his new wife Rose were honeymooning in Egypt when Rose began falling into unexplained trances. She led him to a specific museum exhibit. The display case number was 666. Over the next 3 days, Crowley sat alone in a Cairo apartment with a pen and paper and claimed to take dictation from a disembodied voice, a supernatural entity he called Iwas, which he sometimes designated as our Lord God the Devil. The Enochian system Dee and Kelly documented was not a simple set of prayers. It included specific invocations called Enochian calls, 48 of them, each tuned to a different layer of the spiritual hierarchy. It used elemental tablets, dense grids of Enochian letters that functioned as maps of angelic territory, and it used sigils, drawn symbols intended to anchor contact with specific named entities. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn adopted the whole framework in the 1880s and formalized it as the most advanced tier of their initiatory system. By the time Crowley encountered it, Enochian wasn't fringe, it was the top of the ladder. What Iwas dictated across those 3 days became the Book of the Law, the founding text of Crowley's religion, Thelema. Its central commandment, "Do what thou wilt," shall be the whole of the law. The book declared that a new era for humanity had begun. It explicitly named Crowley as its prophet. The entity that delivered it, Iwas, Crowley would spend the rest of his life trying to understand, summon again, and ultimately classify as something between a god, a demon, and an extraterrestrial intelligence. Crowley's most devoted American follower was Jack Parsons. The same man building rockets for the US military was also running Crowley's Agape Lodge in Pasadena, performing rituals corresponding with Crowley directly. 2 lives running in parallel, no apparent contradiction in his mind. Religious studies professor Diana Pasulka, in her 2019 book American Cosmic, made a specific observation about Parsons that the official history of rocketry tends to skip over. He drew no line between his occult work and his engineering work. For Parsons, the Agape Lodge rituals and the fuel formula calculations were the same activity, both attempts to interface with something beyond ordinary human perception. He kept them in the same notebooks. He treated them as parallel methods toward the same end. But Parsons' behavior inside the Agape Lodge went well beyond unconventional theology. A 16-year-old boy accused him of rape. Witnesses described a naked pregnant woman being made to jump through fire during rituals. There were reports of animal blood sacrifice, and investigators who searched his home reportedly found a mysterious black box covered in magical symbols, and inside it, home movies of Parsons having sex with his mother Ruth and a large black dog. These details come from the book Sex and Rockets, cited by Nick Redfern in Final Events. Whatever the lodge was practicing, it had crossed into territory the FBI couldn't ignore. January through March 1946, 11 nights in the Mojave Desert. Parsons calls it the Babalon Working. The ritual draws from Enochian magic. Each night, Jack Parsons performs the ceremony with L. Ron Hubbard, his housemate and magical partner. Hubbard stands apart, recording what he perceives on the astral plane. According to both men's written accounts, the desert responded. Wind arrived without weather. The fire bent against physics. Parsons wasn't improvising. The Babalon Working drew directly on Enochian calls, the same specific invocations Dee and Kelly had transcribed from their angelic sessions 3.5 centuries earlier. The working structure moved through the Enochian hierarchy in sequence. Elemental tablets, sigils drawn in the sand, invocations spoken aloud into desert wind. L. Ron Hubbard, who was present as Parsons' scribe during the working, recorded the ritual steps in near clinical detail. Whatever they were doing, they were following an established protocol, not inventing one. While married to his wife Helen, Parsons had already begun a sexual relationship with her younger sister Sarah, who was 17 years old at the time. By the time the Babalon Working began in January 1946, Sarah had become Parsons' primary partner, the woman he intended to serve as the physical vessel, the Scarlet Woman, in the ritual's culminating stages. Jack Parsons kept a diary. Portions of it survive. His own words describe a tangible shift in the Working's final nights. One entry reads, "The Working is accomplished." Another, "The gateway is open." He wasn't writing metaphor. He believed it literally. What Parsons recorded during those final nights went further than ritual success. At some point in the Working, he described what appeared to be an out-of-body experience. His consciousness pulled from his body and transported, in his account, to a specific location, the city of Chorazin. In biblical tradition, Chorazin isn't just any ancient city, it's the place the Antichrist is prophesied to come from. Here's the timeline that would later define the Collins elite's entire argument. June 1946, the Babalon Working concludes. June 1947, Kenneth Arnold makes the first widely reported modern UFO sighting near Mount Rainier, the event that coins the term flying saucer. July 1947, Roswell, 18 months, Parsons declares the gateway open. The sky starts filling up. Later that same year, 1946, Parsons went further still. He formally composed and swore what he called the Oath of the Antichrist, a written declaration in which he professed himself to be the literal embodiment of the Antichrist on Earth. This was not metaphor or theater. It was a signed, documented oath, treated by Parsons as a binding magical act. When the Collins elite later assembled their timeline, this was one of the data points they could not rationalize away. The US government was already watching Jack Parsons. The FBI had opened a file on him years earlier, his occult activities, his associations, and his politics. In 1948, his security clearance was revoked. The file is heavily redacted. His name is at the top. Most of what follows is black bars. On June 17, 1952, an explosion leveled Jack Parsons' home laboratory in Pasadena. He was 37 years old. The official cause was accidental mercury fulminate detonation, a careless moment with a volatile compound. His death was ruled an accident, and that was largely where the official record left it. 5 weeks later, dozens of glowing objects appeared over Washington, D.C., circling the U.S. Capitol dome, tracked simultaneously on radar and visible to military pilots. Front pages everywhere. Whatever the explanation, at least one person inside the Pentagon was looking at both events on the same timeline. The 1952 Washington UFO flap is one of the most documented mass sighting events on record. Radar operators at two separate facilities tracked the objects simultaneously. Military pilots were scrambled twice. Speeds logged on radar were physically impossible for any known aircraft. The Air Force held a press conference, the largest since World War II, and offered an explanation involving temperature inversions that most of the room didn't believe. Somewhere inside the Pentagon, a group of roughly 15 intelligence and defense insiders began meeting. They called themselves, eventually, the Collins Elite. Their founding question, stated in the plainest possible language, was whether the flying disc phenomenon had, quote, devil beginnings. Not extraterrestrial, not Soviet, devil. That one word tells you exactly how far outside normal intelligence analysis this group was willing to go. What they had, when they stepped back and looked at it, a rocket engineer who believed he had opened a gateway, a wave of aerial phenomena beginning almost immediately after, a dead man with a redacted file, and a set of contactee reports, abductees, experiencers, whose accounts shared features that no one had cross-referenced yet. They were standing at a door. The question was whether they wanted to know what was on the other side. They decided they did, and the first thing they did was pull the contactee files. Accounts that had been sitting in a cabinet for years, never read with this question in mind. What they found there would shift the entire direction of the investigation. The press had dismissed these witnesses as harmless cranks, but they shared a hidden connection that everyone else had overlooked. They weren't using radio receivers or specialized antenna arrays to reach out to space beings. Instead, they were using Ouija boards, automatic writing, and seance methods, lifted directly from 19th century spiritualism. Then one case stopped them cold. In 1953, a housewife named Frances Swan was sitting at a farmhouse table in Maine when her hand began moving across paper on its own. Rapid, involuntary strokes, filling page after page with messages she insisted she wasn't consciously writing. She believed she was receiving transmissions from non-human intelligences. On its own, that would have been easy to dismiss. What made it impossible to ignore was her neighbor. Living directly next door to Frances Swan was Admiral Herbert Knowles, a career naval intelligence officer who had been reading her transmissions and forwarding them up the chain, all the way to the White House. The documents show the messages were escalated, not filed under crackpot correspondence. Knowles' signature is on the memos. The chain of custody runs all the way to the executive level. The Collins elite kept pulling, and in the late 1960s they came across a witness unlike the contactees. Paul Garrett was a British researcher with documented connections to defense intelligence. Not a spiritual seeker, not a hobbyist, he had survived a catastrophic car crash that left him clinically dead on a rain-soaked road. What he reported seeing during those minutes changed the group's internal framework permanently. According to Garrett's account, his consciousness fell into the blue void. Not darkness, not light, but a depthless blue that extended in every direction without horizon. Above him, enormous craft hovered, not metallic, not mechanical. They pulsed, they breathed, and below him, human figures lay across the floor of this place, while beams of light pulled glowing orbs from their bodies, slowly, systematically, one by one. He understood without being told what the orbs were. He could not move. He could only watch in horror as human souls were harvested. For the Collins elite, this was the missing piece. Garrett hadn't described a vehicle. He described something alive, something that fed. The human figures weren't captives being studied. They were livestock being culled, and what was being taken wasn't tissue, wasn't DNA. It was the soul. Garrett's account wasn't isolated. The Collins elite cross-referenced it with other near-death testimonies in their files. Across multiple unconnected witnesses, different countries, different decades, different circumstances, the same elements recurred: the blue void, hovering craft, something luminous extracted from the human body. The group pinned the accounts side by side. The pattern held. By 1970, the Collins elite had company. Operation Upend, the CIA's program dedicated to investigating occult phenomena, began sharing data with the group. Classified files changed hands. No names went on the record. What had started as a fringe internal inquiry now had a second institutional engine behind it, and both were pointed in exactly the same direction. Enter Sybil Leek, Britain's most famous self-described witch. By the early 1970s, she had a documented history of predictions that had attracted attention well beyond the occult press. Military intelligence had been watching her for years. In 1972, the Collins elite decided they wanted a controlled channeling, a ritual session, conducted under observation with their own officers in the room. The room was thick with incense. The officers sat rigid in their chairs. By the account that reached the Collins elite's internal reports, Sybil Leek entered trance. Her head fell back, and a voice came out of her was not hers. It was lower, flattened, carrying no recognizable affect. It identified itself as Keksulikam. Then Keksulikam started talking about humanity. It described the human race as a global farm. It said the alien disguise was the most efficient harvesting tool ever deployed, appearing as extraterrestrials. They are welcomed, studied, invited in. Appearing as demons, humanity would resist. The harvest continues unimpeded. The Collins elite's worst theory wasn't a theory anymore. The thing they feared most had just confirmed it. Following the Sybil leak channeling, the Collins elite produced a formal internal report. Its conclusion, according to records describing its contents, UFOs are not extraterrestrial craft. They are demonic entities operating a long-running deception against the human species. And the US military, the report warned, was actively being seduced into occult pacts with them. They had started with a scientific question: what are UFOs? They ended with a theological answer that reframed every assumption about alien contact, human history, and the nature of the soul. The Pentagon briefing room was the same. The men who walked out were not, and one faction had already decided that the next step wasn't more investigation. The next step was contact. By the 1980s, a faction inside the Department of Defense had stopped asking questions about the entities and started talking to them, formally, with ritual, ancient Sumerian invocations performed inside government facilities, adapted for what they called psychotronic weaponization, the idea that demonic forces could be contacted, controlled, and deployed as strategic assets. Their own colleagues had a simpler name for it: making a pact with the devil. Not everyone inside the program accepted this. There were Christian scientists, physicists with Department of Defense clearances, who watched colleagues perform ritual invocations in government laboratories and couldn't reconcile what they were seeing with anything they believed. Then people started dying. The official explanations were thin. The unofficial explanation held privately by those who witnessed it was that the entities had been provoked and had answered. Two of those physicists decided they couldn't carry that weight alone. They contacted Ray Bowish, Anglican priest and UFO researcher, and asked to meet, not through official channels, in a hotel room in Nebraska, off the record. Lincoln, Nebraska, November 1991. Ray Bowish sits across the table from two men who are trembling. One slides a manila folder across without speaking. According to Bosch's own account, he opened it and found photographs. Human bodies in clinical chairs, wired, electrodes at the temples and wrists, no visible cause of death. The faces, he said, were unreadable, not peaceful, not anguished, just absent. He described the images as documentation that a government program had conducted fatal experiments using demonic ritual contact. This isn't secondhand rumor. Ray Bowish documented the meeting contemporaneously. His notes record the date, the location, the physicist's credentials. He later published an account detailing the entire encounter. The core details have remained consistent across decades. He has never walked it back. The physicists told Bowish the program had used the same ceremonial frameworks Jack Parsons had worked with 40 years earlier, Enochian and Sumerian rites, formally adapted for military application. The goal wasn't worship, it was control. Establish communication, establish leverage, weaponize the contact. The entities, they said, had not cooperated on human terms. The people in those photographs were the result. The Enochian framework the physicists described to Bowish wasn't a casual borrowing. Enochian magic is considered among ceremonial practitioners to be among the most intense and potentially destabilizing systems in the Western occult tradition. specifically because its stated purpose is direct contact with non-human intelligences. The Dee and Kelly sessions had produced warnings embedded in the transmissions themselves. Some of the entities contacted were described by the angels as dangerous, adversarial, not to be invoked lightly. The DoD program, according to the physicists, had ignored that distinction entirely. Then the physicists described the Collins elite's internal conclusion about Roswell, and it reframed everything. The 1947 crash debris weren't alien spacecraft. According to the group's assessment, they were occult artifacts, deliberately manifested, planted. The demonic entities had, in the Collins elite's framing, staged a cosmic false flag, producing physical evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, specifically to redirect human attention away from the spiritual dimension of what was happening. Roswell wasn't a crash, it was bait. By 1998, the Collins elite had formalized everything into a classified internal report. According to researcher Nick Redfern, who obtained accounts of its contents, the document concluded that UFO phenomena are demonic in origin, that public disclosure would trigger apocalyptic consequences, and that suppression was therefore a theological obligation, not a cover-up, but a moral duty. The US government, by this reading, was keeping the secret not to protect technology programs. It was keeping the secret to prevent the end of the world. Independent of the Collins elite, a separate research organization had been building its own case file from a completely different angle. The CE4 research group spent years documenting a specific, recurring pattern in abduction testimony. When abductees invoked the name of Jesus Christ during an abduction event, the experience stopped. Not sometimes. According to their documented cases, running into the hundreds, 0 exceptions, the aliens vanished. The event terminated every time. The implication is direct. A physical spacecraft operated by biological organisms would not be affected by a spoken religious invocation. But if these entities have domain restrictions, theological vulnerabilities, then the CE4 data isn't an anomaly. It's a diagnostic. The Collins elite had reached the same conclusion through classified ritual experiments. The CE4 group reached it through abductee testimony. They were measuring the same thing from opposite ends. Luis Elizondo ran the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 to 2017. He is described in multiple public accounts walking classified UAP files to senior officials who refused to engage. One encounter he has recounted specifically, a high-ranking official blocking a doorway, placing a hand on his chest, and telling him directly that these things are demonic, and that pursuing the investigation would provoke Satan. Elizondo said he stood in a Pentagon corridor under fluorescent lights, classified files under his arm, and realized US policy on UAPs was being shaped not by analysis, but by apocalyptic faith. Elizondo went on record. After his resignation in 2017, he confirmed in multiple televised interviews that senior Pentagon officials had actively blocked UAP research on explicitly religious grounds. His quoted statement, "I was told these things are demonic and we should not be looking into them." This is not inference or hearsay. It is a named, credentialed former government official, on camera, describing theology driving national security policy. In 2010, Nick Redfern published Final Events, detailing the Collins elite and everything attached to it. The story was out. Whatever had been contained inside classification and private confession was now on bookstore shelves. The official response, when it finally came, wasn't a denial. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, established in 2022 as the US government's current official UAP investigation body, published a 2024 report that addressed the Collins elite by name. Their characterization, a quote, rumor-based religion, the official UAP investigation arm of the military, formally labeled a faction of its own historical military intelligence apparatus a fringe cult. That is either a dismissal or a very deliberate distancing. Diana Pasulka's academic framing placed all of this inside a larger argument that space exploration had become functionally a technological religion and not by accident. The Jesuit priest and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's concept of the noosphere, a collective human consciousness evolving toward transcendence, is cited regularly inside aerospace circles. The scientists Pasulka interviewed weren't fringe figures. They held clearances, ran missions, and sat on government advisory boards, and they talked about their work in terms that would have been familiar to Aleister Crowley. Then Dr. Michael Heiser offered a critique that cut deeper than dismissal. Heiser, a biblical scholar with a PhD in Hebrew Bible and Semitic languages, argued that the Collins elite's demonology didn't hold up to serious theological scrutiny, but he didn't stop at calling it sloppy. He raised a harder question. What if the entire architecture of the story was constructed? What if the classified documents, the ritual experiments, the demonic conclusions? What if it was a sophisticated disinformation operation, engineered to make Christian believers inside the military-industrial complex appear to be a clandestine faction running defense policy on apocalyptic theology? In that reading, the truth Redfern uncovered wasn't the secret, it was the weapon. Here is where the two critiques converge. AARO calls it a rumor-based religion. Heiser calls it a possible intelligence operation. Both arrive at the same structural conclusion. The Collins elite belief system, whether organically grown or deliberately planted, may have functioned as a mechanism to install theological terror inside military decision-making, using fear of Armageddon to suppress scientific inquiry into UAP phenomena. If it's real, the military made a pact with demons. If it was planted, someone engineered a belief system capable of paralyzing Pentagon policy. And it worked. Neither answer is reassuring. What is not in dispute, Luis Elizondo confirmed that senior Pentagon officials blocked UAP research on religious grounds. That happened. The CE4 data exists. Ray Bosch's notes exist. The 1998 report's existence has been described by a named researcher. Whatever the Collins elite was, genuine theological investigators, a weaponized disinformation product, or something in between, its belief system demonstrably shaped the behavior of people inside the most powerful military on Earth. By the 2000s, the Collins elite had fractured. A moderate wing believed the truth should come out, controlled, spiritually framed, a warning delivered to the public before it was too late. The hardline wing had a different plan entirely, and once you hear it, the word conspiracy will not feel adequate. The hardline faction's proposal: stage a fake second coming of Christ. A holographic apparition, the figure of Jesus Christ projected into the night sky over a major city, visible to millions. Mass conversion, global spiritual mobilization, an entire planet suddenly sincerely convinced the end had come and ready to fight what was coming. The Collins elite's hardline wing called it salvation. The plan had a name: Project Bluebeam. Take a moment with that. A US government faction, people with security clearances, institutional budgets, and access to classified technology, sat in a room and planned to fake the return of God, to fight demons they weren't certain were real. Using a hologram, they were not cynics. By all accounts, they were true believers. They thought it was the only way to save the human race. That may be the most unsettling part of the entire story. Researcher Nick Redfern documented a blue beam adjacent proposal within the Collins elite's hardline faction in Final Events. The architects of the plan are described not as cynical manipulators, but as people who genuinely believed the human race was running out of time. That framing matters, because it means the suppression, the ritual experiments, the fake second coming were not the work of people who had lost their faith. They were the work of people who had too much of it. Step back and look at the shape of what the Collins elite produced. They feared an apocalyptic demonic invasion, so they suppressed scientific inquiry. They installed theological gatekeepers inside military structures. They considered manufacturing a false religious event on a global scale. In trying to prevent the end of the world, they may have created exactly the conditions for it. Institutional paralysis, state-controlled theology, and a secret faction accountable to no one. Congressional UAP disclosure battles have run into the same wall Luis Elizondo described. Named officials have blocked UAP legislation, not on conventional national security grounds, but on theological ones. AARO's own 2024 report circles the same institutional resistance without fully explaining it. The obstruction Elizondo documented is not historical, it is ongoing. There are two possibilities, and neither one closes cleanly. If the Collins elite is real, the US government made a literal pact with entities it believed were demonic. People died in the experiments, and disclosure is being suppressed to prevent triggering Armageddon. If the Collins elite is disinformation, then who built it, who deployed it, and what exactly were they trying to make the most powerful military in the world believe? And why does the suppression look identical either way? Go back to the photograph Ray Boash was handed in 1991. A man in a chair, wired to electrodes, expression unreadable. We don't know what killed him. We don't know if anything summoned from those Enochian rituals was real. But someone inside the US government put him in that chair. They signed off on it. They funded it. And they genuinely believed they were fighting the devil when they did. That man's name has never been released. He has never been identified. He is still unknown. The UFO phenomenon is unsolved. But that may be the wrong place to look for the stakes. US policy has been shaped for decades actively by named officials in named buildings. Not by what the evidence shows, but by what a hidden faction fears. And what they fear is the end of the world. The man in the photograph doesn't need to have been killed by a demon for that to matter. He just needs to be real. And no one has ever proven he wasn't.